Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Planning Advisory Committee meeting for the Municipality of the County of Kings for Tuesday, August the 9th. All our members are present. I will recognize Joanna as our recording secretary. Lorianne is off this afternoon. I'm sure none of you minded giving up this rainy afternoon to be here as opposed to home. I will mention that this is the first time we are live streaming our meeting, so forewarned. I'm going to call the meeting to order. All of our members are present and accounted for. Do any of the members we have an agenda in front of us. I have one amendment. Is there anyone else that would have one before I make the other? No. We will be adding our CAO, Mr. Scott Conrad, to the agenda at 7A. And moving Councillor Windsor's motion to 7B. Without amendment, I'll look for a motion to approve. Chantal? Ms. Gagnon, thank you. Councillor Allen, thank you. We do put things by hand, show of hands at the moment because we don't have our system set up for voting to be able to show it to the audience, but we're working on that for the next time. So with a show of hands, approval of the agenda. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. With an approved agenda, is there any disclosure of conflict of interest from any of the members of the committee? Nothing? Good. So you also have before you the minutes of our June 14th, 2022 meeting, and hopefully you've all had a chance to read those over. If there's no corrections, amendments, I'll entertain a motion to approve. Councillor Windsor, thank you. Councillor Granger, thank you. All those in favor? That's unanimous, thank you. So 7A is our CAO, Scott Conrad. So Mr. Conrad will come up to present.
Thanks.
All kinds of stuff up there. There we go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. I don't recognize everyone. I'll say up front that the chair will make fun of me. I've got different size font here depending on what I'm looking at, so we're still waiting to get an eye appointment. Anyway, I won't take much of your time. I think about 10 or 12 slides put together. Generally start off with the intent of what I'm presenting, which is to request that the Planning Advisory Committee not consult the public on incentive or bonus zoning as previously discussed. So in other words, proceed with the public participation process in the absence of this aspect of regulatory control. So we'll circle back to that. So I'm here this afternoon. And the second thing I generally do is talk about what the authority is. So Section 31 of the Act says the CAO shall review the drafts of all proposed bylaws and policies. So that's and make recommendations. So that's one of the reasons why I'm here. And as you are well aware, there's sections 191 and 220 of the Act that talk about the subject matter at hand. So incentive or bonus zoning means the requirements that permit the relaxation of certain requirements if the applicant exceeds other requirements or undertakes other action in the public interest as specified in the requirements. And then Section 220 of the Act sets out in the context of the land use bylaw, or the content of the land use bylaw, provide for incentive or bonus zoning. So we're here talking about incentive or bonus zoning, and more specifically what my opinion is on that relative to the new Minas secondary plan. So I believe I'm also here at your request. If I read the motion correctly, at your last meeting you requested any adjustments, so I'm here to make a suggested adjustment. So that's the actual motion that comes out of your minutes that you just approved. So in terms of background, incentive or bonus zoning will involve the establishment of a restricted financial reserve on the municipality's balance sheet. So that reserve doesn't, at the end of the year, if there's a profit or loss, it doesn't get closed out to the surplus or deficit of the municipality. It stays on the books. So you can accrue that reserve and build it up. It does not get closed out to, as I say, to surplus or deficit at the end of the year. There's inflow and outflow sort of elements of the fund. So money comes into that reserve, money flows out of that reserve. And in my estimation, the inflow and outflow need to be carefully defined. So as I say, here's the example how the fee is calculated and the detailing of the type of expenditures or restrictions that can be placed on the reserve. So I would phrase this a little bit differently in more sort of general terms, in that the reserve needs to be scoped. So what is the intent of the reserve? So what's the function of the reserve? How is the money to be collected? And then how is the money to be spent? Those three basic elements. So I did do a bit of a dive on this, and the literature that I looked at appears to be, not exclusively, but somewhat predominantly relates to density residential development. So the example would be a developer wants to put another couple floors on a residential unit, and the agreement is entered into that yes, he or she can do that, but there's an incremental fee that's charged. In HRM, for example, I don't know if I'll get all four of them here, but it can be applied to a community park, it can be applied to public art, it can be applied to, I think, a conservation, heritage conservation building, and there's another one that's escaping me, but there's four. Housing, exactly, affordable housing. So there's also, in my estimation, a clear quid pro quo relationship between the municipality and the developer. So I'm going to skip ahead quickly because I talk a little bit more about that in the next slide here. So the developer receives a benefit, as I just mentioned, like the example would be, or one example might be, an increase in the building height, while the municipality collects a fee which is used, and this is my own characterization of this, my own reading of this, more, it's not, I want to be transparent as I can, not exclusively, but more often than not, in the neighborhood or zone related to the development. So my read is you collect a fee, it's attached to that development somehow within sort of relative proximity of that development. There is also a linkage between the fee collected, the development, and the improvement. So it's kind of like a three-legged stool. You collect the fee, the developer is allowed to do something, and then the third leg of the stool, something's improved in that zone, let's say. So I think this is an interesting concept. I mean, we've been reading about this relative to other recent, this is not a recent change in the Act, but there is a recent change to the Act that talks about incentivizing affordable housing, excuse me, so it's very topical. I think this particular one is a substantive issue that I think needs a discussion paper that would be generated prior to public consultation. I don't think it's like a go out and with a blank whiteboard and say, okay, what are we going to put on the whiteboard? I think it has to be scoped, that people then can have an informed discussion on it. So in my estimation, that type of discussion paper would look at governance implications, given the variety of local government structures in Kings. So again, to compare and contrast ourselves to HRM, it's one regional government, one county. We know that we have 7 villages, 3 towns in the rural municipality here. If I characterize ourselves as a rural municipality, within the rural municipality, we also have growth centers. So there's quite a bit of difference between those types of governance models. I guess another way to phrase that is the developer has options in Kings County. If you're an HRM, you're dealing with HRM. There's also proposed linkages, so the use of the reserve relative to the benefits accrued by the developer. Other points in a discussion paper might include a detailing of how the fee could be calculated, so the inflows. So, you know, there's one suggestion that it would be a linear calculation, like a fee that's set per number of square footage. It could be a stepped calculation where it's, you know, if you're within a certain bin of square footage, that it would change. It wouldn't be one constant one. And there's probably another 2 or 3 mathematical ways that could be calculated. The estimated sufficiency and relevancy of the reserve to address the intended use. So what I'm trying to say here is, will the fee generate sufficient funds to address the intent? So is it, you want to do something, so the amount of fees that you think you're going to collect, is it actually going to have enough financial power, momentum to do those changes? It's also, in my mind, is the planned expenditure in the municipal, what I refer to as the swim lane. So for example, if we're talking about the secondary plan in New Minas, we know that the number one highway is Commercial Street, so that's under the provincial purview. It's in their swim lane, and the villages control the sidewalks. So it's, is the fee that you're collecting, is it something that you would normally do? I think there's another example, if we're talking about derelict buildings, so you go to the section of the Act which is dangerous and unsightly. So if someone has an unsightly building, the theory behind that section of the Act is you issue an order, and if the owner doesn't fix it up, the municipality fixes it up and puts the lien or the charge on their tax bill. So again, that's not something that comes out of a reserve. There's a legislative mechanism to address either a dangerous and unsightly property. So as just a speaking point, if your reserve is set up to do something like that, I would question whether there's an alternative authority under the MGA to do that, whether we're in the right swim lane or not. What sectors should be involved? As I mentioned, seems to be a lot of residential discussion. And also, and I think the latter one is more, to be upfront, is more of a subjective sort of comment on my part. I truly would like to see a discussion paper, but everyone has an opinion, so I guess why not? So I put it here, phrase it as pragmatic development considerations. So we know south of the 101 is slope, it's granite. Some folks say the hardest granite this side of Spryfield. There's a significant number of PIDs. There's probably 25 or so or more parcels up there that have to be assembled. There's a road that's not in place. So there is significant constraints. It's not like going into a greenfield south of the 101. I think it's going to take the right developer and some time to put all of those components together. So if not structured properly, it could be viewed not as, and in fact not be an incentive or a bonus, but be more of a restrictive thing or an impediment to the right type of development. So as part of the business arising, so that's my recommendation, is that as part of the business arising from the minutes that PAC resolved, I'm just going to check my notes because I think I might have skipped over one slide here. No, I guess I didn't. So I have confidence in our staff that we can come back with, at some point going forward, with a robust consultation paper. My bias is at this point in time, it seems to be more related to residential. Doesn't mean it needs to be, but defining that intent and the use and the sufficiency of the reserve should form part of that discussion paper, so there's an informed consultation. So my suggestion here is for your consideration is that you render a motion that would say something to the effect that the Planning Advisory Committee release the draft growth center of New Minas secondary plan for consultation absent references to incentive or bonus zoning. So I have been around since day one on this secondary plan, and we've gone through a couple of iterations with provincial funding and a whole bunch of studies. Like, it's time, and we're in a real growth period. We really need that secondary, in my estimation, we need the secondary plan. So I think it would be good to get on with that and then circle back to the bigger picture of what does bonus or incentivizing look like, and is it just New Minas or is it broader than that? So that's my suggestion for your consideration. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
We do have a question. Councillor Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. CAO. I just wanted to, really appreciate you coming in and clarifying what is a complex matter. So you're saying, according to your motion, which is in line with what I was suggesting with my motion to rescind, that at some point in time, when we work it into our work plan, that we'd develop a consultation paper and consult on this. This is not a commitment today to do it, or nothing like. We're not making a commitment to do it, but it's something that's in your mind. And so, can you clarify that?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Windsor, I think you're basically right. I mean, it certainly would form part of our annual work plan.
Right.
I think with, for example, the growth in residential density development, that, and I know that our manager and director have a keen interest, so I don't think it's too far down the road, but there's a lot of day-to-day stuff going on as well, so as soon as we can get to it, we get to it.
I wanted just to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the Committee on Clarification? No. Thank you, Mr. Conroy.
Thank you.
So the motion oh, sorry, Councillor Windsor? Yeah. I didn't cut you off, did I?
No,
Sorry.
well, no, I was late. I was just going to say that I would be prepared to make the motion.
Okay, that's
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Killam, thank you. Is there any debate? No? Okay. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Great, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. So the next motion is Councillor Windsor's motion to rescind. How do you wish to proceed, Councillor Windsor?
Given the motion that we just approved, it makes my motion a moot point,
Okay,
so we can just go right by.
wonderful.
Thank
you. So the next item on our agenda is approval of the Centerville Area Advisory Committee members. And you're going to have to give me a minute here. Do you have that, Joanna? I have to read it. Okay. So the motion is that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Council appoint Aaron Dondale and Kimberly Foote, members of the Centerville District Community Development Association, to sit on the Centerville Area Advisory Committee for a one-year term, and that Michael Foote be appointed a citizen member for a two-year term. Do we have a mover, please? Councillor Allen? Councillor Windsor, thank you very much. Ms. Friars? Oh, you were
No.
just, but, go ahead. No question?
No question.
Okay. Are there any questions? Any debate? All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Joanna. Pulling my fat out of the fire. Okay. Next, we're moving on to the business of the day. The first is an application to enter into a development agreement at 9347 Commercial Street, New Minas, and that file belongs to Ms. Mosier. Your light is on. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we're here today for a development agreement application from Mr. Robert Coldwell, who owns the property at 9347 Commercial Street in New Minas. So by way of background, this property is in the general commercial or C1 zone. Currently, there are two main buildings on the property. The first is a commercial building, which has a business office on the ground level and a residential unit up above it. The owner has also built a separate detached garage building. We did discover an illegal unit was under construction in that building, and so through a compliance process, we have received this application to legalize that unit as well as an additional unit within that same garage building. I should also point out that the property has a shed on it, but that's not subject of this application at all. It's just an accessory building. So the subject property is on Commercial Street in New Minas. It is on the north side of Commercial Street near Bonavista and Silver Fox Avenue. Silver Fox Avenue, for everyone's reference, is the street that Home Depot is located on. So this is just across the street from Home Depot. This is our zoning map. You will see that most of the land around this property is C1 on Commercial Street, and then in the residential area to the rear, the zoning is R2. South of Commercial Street, we see a little bit of R5 that's currently undeveloped, as well as C6, which is a comprehensive business development zone. So that is that fairly large commercial development that incorporates the Home Depot, the Michaels, the Winners, all of those uses. This is our, I should also note, this map doesn't have it on it, but it is subject to a well field protection zone. So I will discuss that very briefly later on as part of the general criteria. In terms of our land use designations, nothing surprising here. The commercial areas are designated commercial and the residential areas are designated residential. These are some photos of the subject site. You'll see the photo on the left shows the main building that has the business office as well as the apartment above. And the second photo on the right is just a photo of the rear of that building. The photo on the right on this slide is a photo of the garage building. So you'll see the 2 garage doors at the bottom, but also a balcony up top. The illegal unit was discovered on the ground floor, so on the same floor as the garage doors, and the second unit would be located on the second floor of this building. The photo in the bottom left is the current access to the illegal, well, one of the accesses. You can see there's also another door on the front of that building, but on the side there is an access into that unit, and then you can see the stairs in that bottom photo, and then the top left photo is the top of those stairs with the access to the second unit in there. I never know how they're going to look on the screen for you when I put them in the slide. It doesn't look great, so I'll go over it. So out in, here, let me get, this is better. So this is our main building here with the commercial use, and then this is the apartment building. So we saw a view from sort of here. We could see the 2 garage doors, and here's the deck that extends outward from the building. This is where the step, the side door would have been here. The steps go up and wrap around, and then that door on the second level is here. And then this is the shed I mentioned earlier. So when we look at our municipal planning strategy, our enabling policy reads, the council shall consider only by development agreement in all commercial zones proposals for residential developments that cannot meet applicable zone standards. In evaluating such development agreements, council shall be satisfied that the condition that prevents the proposal from being permitted as of right in the designation is addressed by the DA. So this is twofold, actually. One, the garage building, especially the deck, did not meet setback requirements in the underlying zone, so that's one thing that needed to be addressed. And the second is that the units in the detached garage are not permitted as of right in the commercial zone. So residential units are permitted in the general commercial zone, provided they are located either above, behind, or below a commercial use. So given that there's no commercial use in that second building, those units are considered illegal because they are standalone. This development agreement enables us to consider additional residential uses. So if the proposal is for a residential or mixed-use development, this would be considered a mixed-use development because there is a commercial use on the property. It's just not in the same building. So if the proposal is for a mixed use, the council shall be satisfied that the residential component of the proposal has a compact built form and doesn't consist of low-density housing forms. So typically, we would consider a 2-unit dwelling a low-density housing form. However, given that this is a pre-existing building, was issued permits for as an accessory building, so it does exist, it wasn't built purposefully as a dwelling. So while we would consider a 2-unit dwelling a low-density housing form, this site is very small. It's under 10,000 square feet in lot area. It already contains 1 residential unit. The 2 additional residential units, this is a compact site, and so this would be a compact built form. And it is adding very much needed housing in an area that is walkable, that has access to amenities. So while this isn't maybe how the policy was written, staff are confident that this does meet the intent of the policy. Subsection or second one, number 2, proposal is oriented towards the street and contributes to a vibrant and active streetscape. So we did mention that there is an existing commercial building that is contributing to activity to our commercial streetscape. So this would be considered that this criteria was met as well, and that the proposal incorporates pedestrian-friendly features into the design. And I believe the DA requires some indication of a pedestrian walkway. And that the proposal meets the general DA criteria. So we'll go over that too. So our general criteria indicates that the proposal is meant to be in keeping with the NPS, and we believe that it is, that it doesn't have a negative financial impact on the municipality, given that this is an intensification of an existing site. We have every indication that the financial impact will be positive. There's no additional infrastructure required. Land use compatibility, given that it's residential to the rear, commercial in the front, we don't believe there will be any land use compatibility, given that that sort of mirrors the site. The commercial uses in the front, the residential uses are to the rear. The adequacy and proximity of school or recreation and community facilities. So this is very close to an elementary school and a middle school, as well as the Louis Millet Center and Lockhart Ryan Park. So school, recreation, and community facilities are abundant in this area. The Department of Public Works did not indicate that there would be any traffic hazards or congestion created by this use. We consulted with the New Minas Fire Department, and they indicated that there would be no issue providing fire protection. The village has indicated that sewer and water capacity are more than adequate for this use. We do not believe that there will be any flooding or drainage problems. This application is not going to result in any new construction, so the current site condition is intended to remain the same, and we're not aware of any flooding or drainage problems resulting from this site at this time, so we don't believe this will generate any new impacts. Negative impacts on well fields or other groundwater supplies. So as I mentioned, this is within a well field protection overlay, but residential uses are not considered high risk in this well field overlay. I believe it's in C. So pollution, including soil erosion, siltation of water courses. Again, there's no new construction proposed, so we don't expect that to be an issue. And the site is not located near a lake or farms, so we don't expect there to be negative impacts on lakes or farming operations. And the suitability of the site, so all the buildings are already there, so we think it's fairly suitable. So the draft DA enables 2 residential units within the existing accessory building. And in order to ensure that adequate parking can be provided on site, we will be requiring a parking plan at the time of permitting. In terms of our process, we are here at the Planning Advisory Committee. Properties within 500 feet were notified of this application and the public information meeting, to which we did not receive any negative feedback. Those same properties will be notified of the public hearing. So here we are at Planning Advisory Committee, and I will put the recommendation on the screen and pass it back to the chair. Did you want me to read that into the record, Martha? Sorry, Councillor Armstrong.
We'll deal with clarification first, if you don't mind. Are there any questions of clarification for staff? Councillor Granger? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You touched on it right on the end, the parking. So the garage, the back is for that residential thing. So the one at the front has residence and commercial. So how does that work?
So through you to Councillor Armstrong, so the parking is calculated based on our standard parking calculation. So 3 residential units need 1 parking space each, and then the commercial is based on the floor area. So,
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Morse?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You touched on that the accessory building doesn't meet the setbacks. I'm just wondering, is that addressed or how is that addressed in the development agreement?
through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Morse. As you can imagine, the building is already there. So while there was, the deck at the outset was encroaching somewhat on the neighboring property, and that has been remedied. So we've ensured that that was remedied. But otherwise, given that the building is already there, we can't move the building. So we've accepted, I mean, this is an active commercial area. Chances are the impacts from surrounding commercial uses would be more intense than a standard residential use. So we just don't believe that the negative impacts associated with 2 additional residential units are going to be overly onerous, given that the properties to the rear can also have 2 units on the property. So 1 additional unit on a commercial property is probably a fairly minor impact.
Thank you. And just one more. So with the development agreement, does that then, I guess, sort of negate the fact that it doesn't meet the setbacks? Does it sort of confirm what's there and legalize it?
Yes, so the development, sorry, through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Morris, the development agreement does legalize that deficiency.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gagnon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few questions. One is, I assume the building code compliance is there for the units on top of the garage, and that, I don't know if that's under our authority or not.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, so that's outside the scope of this application. That happens later after they've applied for permits. So they'll be required to meet the building code just like every other development.
Okay. And if they hadn't already built it, would their application have passed with the current zoning as is?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, are you asking if it would be permitted as of right?
Well, no, from what I understand, it would have been as of right, but had they requested a development agreement prior to actually building the building, would that have worked for them? Because I'm just wondering about precedents that we're setting as to, just adding, I'm going to build a garage, they got the permit for the garage, but then they add a unit on top, and then after they do the development agreement. So just wondering, given it, all the arguments that were being seen, is that staff would maybe have approved, or it would have worked to get a development agreement to have the dwellings there. And so I'm just wondering what kind of precedents we're maybe setting for more illegal units being built and then going to development agreement.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, we have to take every application on a case-by-case basis. That's the purpose of a development agreement, is to be able to look at a site, its specific context, and the policy. So I can't really answer your question because we would take it on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Windsor?
Thank you. Ms. Gagnon touches on a point that has been sore with me over my 10 years of being on council, where some people go ahead and do things without permission and then seek forgiveness, and we call it legitimizing, and others take the proper route and come in and do the work up front. And so it never sits well with me. I understand the case by case, but that always frustrates me. And I try and be mindful in the consideration that there could be times when we've got to say, no, undo it. And I think if that we're ever faced with that, we need to do it. But I just don't like the approach of doing things and coming in and seeking forgiveness when we have a process that's published and most people follow it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dvorak?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I thought I just would clarify the dwelling unit in the garage never actually was completed. We were made aware of it during some very initial renovations. So there was never actually a dwelling unit illegally there. To your point, he was well on his way to doing that, but it never actually existed. And then through this process, he approached us on the ability of adding a second. So the scope that we would have reviewed it was, to Chantel's question, is the issue is he would not have been able to do any of this as of right, as Laura had mentioned in her presentation, because there was not a commercial presence down below. So it's more what is reasonable for what we saw in the site, in the neighborhood, based on the policies in front of us. In one of Laura's pictures, you can see that to the rear, we're dealing with a retaining wall and quite a grade difference to the neighbor. Oh, I guess you can't quite see it, but that greenery represents a fairly substantial grade difference that between them and that neighbor to the rear, which is also a second unit. So based on the site situation, I believe we would have, had this been a vacant garage, we would have ended up here. Potentially, the decking might have gotten to a different spot, but given the site situation, maybe not. So it's hard to know exactly where we would have ended up on a blank slate, but the site itself, it's not unreasonable for all the considerations that we've given us.
Thank you. Councillor Killam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment more than anything. Probably we all know there's other developments like that out in the county, but I'm thinking of referring back to our housing crisis in the county, and
Can I just interrupt for 1 minute?
Sure.
We're still in clarification,
Yeah.
dealing with staff.
Oh, okay,
So do you
sorry.
mind holding your
Yep.
thoughts until we get
No
into
problem.
debate?
No,
I
cool.
appreciate that,
Yep.
thank you. No, that's okay, thanks. So if there's no other questions of clarification for Ms. Mosher, did I turn you back on again? Oh. Okay. You have a question of clarification?
no.
Okay.
Sorry.
Turn that off.
Playing with the buttons.
All right. I'm going to turn it off. There. So we have a motion in front of us that reads, "The Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council give initial consideration to and hold a public hearing regarding entering into a development agreement for the property located at 9347 Commercial Street, PID 55210538 New Minas, to legitimize one residential unit and permit the development of an additional residential unit within an accessory building as described in Appendix C of the report dated August 9th, 2022. Do I have a mover, please? Mr. Morris, thank you. Councillor Killam, thank you. Now we are open for debate. So, Councillor Killam.
Just a comment, I guess, getting back to what I don't know where I was heading with it, other than, as we know, there's other situations out there like this, and I just reflect back to the housing crisis that we have, and wondering if there's a way that we can blanket a policy that would maybe allow other people to come forward and not be penalized too bad, but at least legitimize what is there without a big penalty, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a suggestion. Thank you.
Ms. Mosher, go ahead, your light's on.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Killam, Council has already directed staff to investigate accessory dwelling units, and that is something that we have been working on in the background. As I think, I can't remember if it was Scott or Trish alluded to earlier, we do have a lot of day-to-day going on right now and some staffing changes that are happening, so things are not going as quickly as we would like or hope, but stay tuned. That's next in the pipe.
Okay. I don't see any more lights for questions. I'll call the question. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Mosher. Our next item is an application to enter into a development agreement at 88 Coleman Road, Waterville, and that file belongs to Mr. Fredericks. And you're on.
Sorry, we're having some technical difficulties.
Keep your annotation thing.
It's just not registering.
Can you hit discard?
discard. Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
Okay, thanks very much, folks. Just pulling up some slides here. So yeah, we've got an application for a development agreement from Don Baker. Donald is in the audience today, I would acknowledge. Don's requested permission to build a farm dwelling accessory to his farm, which is located outside of Waterville. So Don Baker's property is it's in the A1 zone, and so that zone, of course, is quite limited in its ability to accommodate residential dwellings. And however, there is the ability to enter into a development agreement to permit a farm dwelling accessory to a farm operation. And Mr. Baker's property is a 30-acre property. About 20 of that is in production, growing both fruit and vegetables, as well as some hay and corn. And the applicant is hoping to live there full-time because there's some UPIC management, there's year-round maintenance, of course, and it's a small-scale farm being operated by one person, and so living on the property would be a major advantage. So we're located outside of the growth center of Waterville in the rural area. In this is zoned A1, so the property is shown in red here, but the entire area of the valley floor in this area is agriculturally zoned. And again, that A1 zone is fairly protected from residential development because, of course, it contains some of the most productive agricultural land in the county. The property and surrounding area is also within the agricultural designation as well. So this air photo map shows the property this is sort of demonstrating some of the hay cropping here. I believe there was corn grown here last year. And then in these areas here, you can see sort of smaller plots of market garden style vegetable growing. There's orchards, vegetables, berries, and fruit trees as well, growing in a few spots throughout here. This is a photograph from earlier in the winter. So it doesn't look as beautiful as it probably does right now, but this sort of shows some of the orchard. And there's some irrigation system in place here. And again, these trees include cherries, pears, peaches, and plums. This is an example of one of the cleared areas for kind of market garden, garlic growing, squash and cucumbers and potatoes, things of that nature. This shows some of the high bush blueberries, which are apparently quite productive right now. And there's an existing barn on the property as well. And that barn you can see in the distance just here. And so south of that barn is the proposed location of a small dwelling. It's a relatively small house. It's about 26 by 26 feet, so not an enormous structure, and it's located close to the road. And that's a goal to preserve as much agricultural land in the back as possible. So it's a well-sited home, and certainly an appropriate use for what's clearly an established farm and one that requires a lot of work. I'm sure 20 acres is a lot of land to maintain. This site plan was submitted. This shows sort of the outer boundary of this property. And again, there's a lot of different things growing in different places, but the building envelope for the home, or the proposed farm dwelling, which is what we're talking about today, is located right about here. Again, it's fairly close to the street, and it provides the applicant easy access to all of the property kind of in the middle, but close to the road. So council has a variety of policies that protect a lot of farmland in the A1 zone, but they also council also has this ability to enter into a development agreement to consider farm dwellings, and we've had a couple of applications of this nature with where there are new farmers or farmers that are relocating to the municipality, location of crops, barns, and pastures, and so on, and that has been submitted. We just saw that. The next criteria is that a professional business plan be submitted, and that has been received as well. And a third party being potentially the Federation of Agriculture, who's also reviewed that business plan, just to verify that it appears to be a reasonable approach to farming. The Federation of Agriculture in this case has reviewed the business plan and didn't have any concerns with the proposal. The next criteria is that there's some demonstration of the intent to farm. So is this person looking to just build a house and then live in the agricultural area, or are they really committed to farming? And we want to verify that through either farm financing or other investments in the farm. So that could include barns or machinery, but it can also include plants, trees, seeds, and other kind of infrastructure, which we do see on this property. So there's a lot of drainage and irrigation systems installed. There's a variety of trees and cleared areas to do as market gardening. So certainly there's a demonstration here that there is a commitment to farm this property. The last criteria relates to livestock and manure storage, and this farm does not include livestock, so this criteria is not required. We also look to see, is the proposal in keeping with the general intent of the planning strategy, and are there other sort of compatibility issues? And so the general criteria we review with every development agreement or land use bylaw amendment, and these are reviewed in more detail in the report. But generally, it is in keeping with the planning strategy. The planning strategy does allow for new farm dwellings to exist, or to be built rather, subject to these sorts of conditions. So it's consistent with the intent of limiting limiting residential development in agricultural areas, with the exception of this kind of scenario where there is the ability to have a new farm dwelling associated with a farm. So it's consistent with that. We found that there's no real financial impact on the municipality. The services are regulated through the development agreement, both septic and water, drinking water wells. There's no real land use conflict expected here. I mean, it's an agricultural area. It's an existing farm, and so a single home associated with that farm doesn't pose a lot of land use conflict. There's no impact on well fields, and the site is perfectly suitable and already underway. So all of these criteria were also met, and so staff were pretty comfortable giving a positive recommendation. We've gone through this process to date. There was a public information meeting held. There wasn't much public feedback received on this file. One immediate neighbor, I think, called to offer her voice of support, but otherwise there were no other correspondence from the public. Those same notification area, though, the notification area within 500 feet of the property, those same landowners will be notified of a public hearing related to this development agreement as well. And a potential motion is on the screen for your consideration. And again, I think just want to verify that staff are fairly confident that this farm dwelling is accessory to a farm business that's established, and staff are comfortable making a positive recommendation to enable that new farm dwelling associated with an existing farm at 88 Coleman Road in Waterville. Thank you very much. I'll pass it back to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Fredericks. Questions of clarification, please. Councillor Killam.
No, I was just ready to make the motion when it comes
Gotcha.
up.
I'll come back to you. Councillor Granger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to know if there's a limitation of size of a dwelling on an A1.
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't believe so. There would be, in this case, it's a fairly small, modest home for one individual, but no, I don't think we'd be limiting the footprint size. So it could be a large family farm home, if you will. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Gagnon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just out of curiosity, what are the rules around renting the home afterwards, if ever, due respect Mr. Baker, he might farm till he's 95 years old, but if, he gets older, stays landlord, but can't stay in the residence anymore, in the dwelling, for whatever reason, is it possible for him to rent the home out and still be landlord of the farm and receive dividends from the farm and all that kind of stuff?
Mm-hmm. Through you, I believe that would be possible. Is that fair to say, Laura? Yeah.
Okay.
So it could be rented.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I have no other lights for clarification. So the motion before us is that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council give initial consideration to and hold a public hearing regarding entering into a development agreement to permit a farm dwelling accessory to a farm business in the agricultural A1 zone on the property located at 88 Coleman Road, PID 55368-302, Waterville, which is substantively the same for minor differences in form, as the draft set out in Appendix D of the report dated August 9, 2022. Councillor Killam moves. Seconder, Mr. Morris, thank you. Any debate? We have Councillor Killam.
No debate, Madam Chair. Just happy to be able to make a motion on this application. It's been a bit of a long haul for Mr. Baker, and I'm pleased that the PAC can push it forward to a successful ending. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other lights. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. I see a big smile at the back of the room. Our last application for today is the application for a non-substantive amendment to a development agreement in Greenwich, and that's Ms. Mosier's file. And you're all ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So our proposal today is for a non-substantive amendment to an existing development agreement. Mr. Chris Marine of LAB Industries purchased the subject property in order to develop it under the current terms of the existing development agreement, which would, his proposal is one apartment building having a maximum of 40 residential units. Similarly, the development agreement would have permitted like a long-term care home having 40 beds, maybe 80 beds, I can't remember. I'm sorry, but his proposal is for an apartment building. So the existing development agreement, which does permit that, contains a 10-year deadline for construction, which expired in 2017. So the development agreement does also indicate that extending this timeline is considered a non-substantive amendment under the development agreement. So that is what we are here to consider today. So the subject property is in Greenwich. It has a lot area of 1.14 acres and has 120 feet of frontage on Fairbanks Avenue. So this development agreement encompasses all of Fairbanks Avenue, as well as the former Horton High site. And under this title block here is another 40-unit apartment building. So this initial 40-unit apartment building was Block A, this middle is Block B, and this is Block C. So Block C enabled the development of townhouse units, of which we see they are on either side of Fairbanks. There's a total of 24 townhouse units on Fairbanks. And this is the last remaining property in Block C. So we do have an applicant who is looking to develop it under the existing terms of the development agreement. And so we are considering a non-substantive amendment to extend that development timeline. So the amendment would add a clause to the existing section 3.8B. So 3.8B reads that the developer shall complete all construction and be in complete compliance with all provisions of this agreement within 10 years of signing this agreement. We're looking to add I below that says, notwithstanding B above, there shall be no construction deadline for the development of PID 555-05960. That is being the one property remaining in Block C. So this would not extend the construction deadline for the balance of the site. It's only for that one PID. So our process for a non-substantive amendment is somewhat different than our typical process. So we do not hold a PIM for this type of application. Staff does do a bit of a review, and then we come to Planning Advisory Committee, and Planning Advisory Committee will make a recommendation to Council, but a public hearing is not needed, so there is no initial consideration and there is no public hearing, and it just goes to final consideration directly out of PAC. And my apologies, this text shouldn't be there because we don't have a public hearing. That's just a carry forward. And our recommendation is on the screen.
Thank you. Questions of clarification? Ms. Gagnon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Why are deadlines for construction placed in the first place in development agreement?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, I have no idea why the previous planner put a deadline on this development agreement. Our current practice for construction deadlines, typically we only apply them in cases of compliance. So if someone does something that's illegal and there is a planning option to legalize them, we might put a deadline in there just so that we ensure that we gain compliance. But I can't speak to why a deadline was put in this development agreement. I wasn't here when it was drafted.
Okay, and with the other sections, Block A and Block B, because this isn't Block C, are they also expired in their development agreement dates? Have they been, where are they at?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, yes, they too have expired, but again, if they wished to come forward and develop in accordance with that development agreement, then you may find us here again, looking for another deadline, or another extension, I guess, an amendment, rather.
For the same process?
Yeah, it would be the same process, though.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Fryers?
For clarification, was I correct in understanding the original development agreement for this parcel was to also to be looked at as a care home or for this large lot, and now he's considering apartments. With the extension, do they have to go through another development agreement process to change the intent?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Fryers, perhaps I was unclear. The development agreement permits either one or the other, so both are currently enabled. It's really just a matter of whichever the developer wished to move forward with.
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you. If there's no other questions, I guess I have one. This has been sitting out there now for 5 years, basically expired. So why doesn't the fact that they didn't meet that requirement, why does that not render this particular development agreement void and bring about another development agreement which may read exactly the same, but without a construction deadline? Yeah, I'm not too sure about that. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me, but I know you have the answer.
Well, through you to you, I may not actually. That's a good question. So these are questions that we as planners ask ourselves every time we draft a development agreement, because we're able to put these terms within. We're able to specify what is a substantive or non-substantive amendment. We can establish these deadlines, but so the reason why we can come for a non-substantive amendment, the answer is basically because the development agreement says we can. So at the time, the drafters of the development agreement wanted some check or balance, so that's why we're here, that's why they put in a deadline, but they were obviously fairly comfortable with the contents in terms of uses within that development agreement, so they didn't require a substantive amendment to extend the deadline.
I guess I'm just sort of looking at it from a legal point of view. A development agreement is a legal document. It's signed, it's set out by I think by a lawyer. It's signed by the mayor, and I'm just wondering if it's valid. That would be my concern. So I don't necessarily have a problem with making this recommendation, but I think before it comes before the final consideration, I'd like an answer to that question, if that's okay, if I can ask that.
I can certainly do some digging in that regard.
Okay. Thank you. Now I have more lights. Councillor Windsor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to that, I noticed, like in the background, the existing agreement was entered into by council in April 2007 while discharging a prior development agreement from 2001. So do we at times say, no, we're not going to extend a development agreement? What are our options anyway? And if we said no to this, what does it mean?
Ms. Javorek has her light on. Maybe she can add something to this conversation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was actually looking to answer your question, but maybe we can circle back. Without disclosing too much, we did already get a legal opinion that we are fine moving forward in the manner that we are. And sorry, Councillor Windsor, I think I'd still circle back to Laura's answer. The DA already exists, and it already has this provision in it to have to have us consider the extension. Off the top of my head, I don't recall why they discharged the previous.
We can bring some more information to
We can look into
council.
that, but it's somewhat wasn't part of our review for today.
Just, sorry to jump in, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Windsor. If PAC recommended council not approve this amendment, then, and council agreed with PAC and refused to extend the deadline or remove the deadline, the applicant can appeal to the Utility and Review Board, which will take a look at the development agreement and say, oh, this is a non-substantive amendment. Why did you turn it down?
Okay. Is that not presuming the UARB outcome there?
Well,
But what I was thinking when I asked the question is, how long can a developer or someone sit with land? We have objectives, and we talk about, infills and things like that, and yet this kind of process can allow good land, developable land that is already serviced to sit in perpetuity. So I think that's the concern you're hearing around the table. And that's the concern that I would have. And I've seen, I've ran into where, well, we know there was people looking for land in New Minas and could not find land to develop. But yet there was land around. Is it tied up in similar arrangements? And I guess the question comes back to, is this an arrangement that needs to be looked at? Thank you.
Ms. Gagnon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just my understanding of what maybe has been said here is just that if, I guess, the development agreement doesn't include, if you miss the deadline, it's null and void, then it's not an automatic null and void. That's how I understand kind of what they were saying. But when you get the information at the council, which I won't, but when you do, it'll be good to know.
Great, thank you. Councillor Killam?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment regarding ownership of the land. I guess whoever owns the land, they can sit on it as long as they want or sell it. And I guess the other point would be that if indeed that particular owner is ready to move forward, but has to go through another development agreement, which would be probably another 8-10 months, do we want to involve ourselves in holding it up that long if they're ready to move forward? I understand all the other comments. I just thought I'd throw that one in. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Did you have something further, Laura?
Yes, thank you, through you, Madam Chair, to, I guess, 3 now. So, Councillor Killam's absolutely right. If someone owns a piece of land and they wish not to develop it or sell it or anything, that is well within their rights. So, similarly, this development agreement, if there's no, in a development agreement, if there is not a timeline for construction, then those uses are permitted in perpetuity until that development agreement is discharged by council. So whether or not other lands that could be developed are tied up in a development agreement is not relevant to this discussion, because whether or not lands are covered by a development agreement or not, when they get developed or whether they get developed is always entirely up to the owner of those lands. The development agreement simply says what you can develop outside of the land use bylaw. Otherwise, it's the land use bylaw that dictates what can be developed. So we're generally not in the practice of writing in like I said before, we're not in the practice of writing in deadlines for construction. And further to that, it's not typical for us to, should we write in a deadline, that if that deadline is exceeded, that it then becomes null and void. That's just generally not a practice that we engage in. It's important to remember for these non-substantive amendments that the development agreement is in place because it already went through the process. It has already been deemed by council to be appropriate for that area. So unless staff have a reason to believe that this is no longer appropriate, then if the development agreement indicates that it is a non-substantive amendment, staff will typically bring that forward without opposition because it has already gone through the democratic process of being approved.
Thank you. Now, I have two more lights, and are they for clarification or are they debate? Okay. Who said what? Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, to Laura, when you mentioned the development agreement stands because it was previously approved, if the municipal planning strategy has changed since the development agreement was written, that would be something staff would consider at the time that the development agreement would need to go through this notwithstanding process. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon, yes. However, and that is the case in this situation, as you're aware. We did adopt new planning documents. So we do turn our minds to that, but if it had been completed within the timeline, it would be existing, and perhaps it could be, if new planning documents are adopted, it could be considered non-conforming, but there was still that process, like that expectation that that use would be there is still out there in the form of this development agreement. So it would have to be something really offside, I think, for staff to be overly concerned, given that it did already go through this process, so.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Windsor, your clarification?
No, sorry,
Debate. Okay, I'll hold your light. All right, so we have no other lights other than Councillor Windsor. He's waiting for debate. The recommendation before us is that the Planning Advisory Committee recommends that Municipal Council approves the non-substantive amendment of the development agreement dated April 3rd, 2007 between MIR1 Developments Incorporated and the Municipality of the County of Kings concerning the property identified as Lot C8, Fairbanks Avenue, PID 55505-960 Greenwich, as described in Appendix A of the report dated August 9th, 2022. Can we have a mover, please? Councillor Allen. Mr. Morris, thank you very much. Now for debate, Councillor Windsor.
Thank you, yeah, and it's always hard to discern, Madam Chair, whether what I wanted to say was in So I'll try and phrase it so that there's debate. But I guess as I listened to the conversation, there were some good comments, and particularly that last one by Madame Gagnon about new plans, and you know, so things changed from 21 years ago, 22 years ago, so I guess that what I was thinking as I listened to the debate as well is there's a process that says this needs to come back and go through PAC and council again. So there must be some meaning to that, and it's not that, well, you know, nothing has changed, so let's rubber stamp it. I don't, so I still think we need to take it with the seriousness that says this comes back to council for their consideration and for their recommendations forward. So that caused me to think a lot about, it shouldn't be automatic. It may be that we all agree with it, but it shouldn't be an automatic, okay, you know, it's just an update. And I said earlier, we maybe need to revisit this mechanism, and maybe some of those things need to be factored in. We don't put a timeline on development, but we put a timeline on the agreement. So what's the purpose of that? And which is why we're here to renew today. Anyway, that was my comments.
Anything further? No? I'll call the question. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Mosher. Our next order of business is to look at scheduling the public participation meeting for the New Minas Secondary Plan. And the one on our agenda that's being suggested is September 13th, 2022 at 6 p.m. That's the day of our, I believe, our PAC meeting in the afternoon. Is that correct? Sorry. Yep. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's right. And if you look at your calendar, that is the day of our normally scheduled PAC. What we are recommending is not having PAC that afternoon and having the public participation meeting that evening instead. Potentially, depending on timelines of how much public input there is, we may tentatively schedule some regular business afterwards, not the New Minas discussion, but if there's any other business, we would, time permitting, do that same night.
At this point, do you anticipate there will be business to come before us in September?
We do.
Okay. You sent this out to me, and I made a suggestion that perhaps we could do PAC later in the afternoon and then have the public participation meeting at 6. We would have do our business late, say at 3 o'clock on that afternoon, get the business done out of the way. We'd break for supper. We'd come back. The reason that I suggested that is because if the public participation meeting is long, we have a lot of participation from our residents, we may not get to that business, which means that we have to come back another day if there are pressing items that need to be dealt with in September. So that gets us here for one day to get the business done. The only thing we have to worry about is our supper, rather than up and back, up and back. So that was my suggestion. So I think staff and I are open to comments. Councillor Windsor.
Madam Chair, I agree with your proposal.
Thank you. Ms. Gagnon.
I have no problems with the proposal, but I am questioning just the process for the New Minas strategic plan after the public meeting. Doesn't the PAC have to right away follow through on that as part of the process after the meeting is officially closed, or would it be brought to the next month PAC meeting for the next step of the process? Because I do believe there's a next step where the PAC has to approve again the strategic plan.
Mr. Burke, can you answer that question?
That's right. PAC does need to address it. I guess what we don't know is how much we're going to hear, what we're going to hear. Is it something that will result in changes? Like there's a few unknowns in that. So potentially we could schedule a PAC to follow public participation to potentially deal with it if there wasn't any new information that came to light based on the public.
Okay, so it's not an automatic that right after, so let's say it's 8:30 at night.
It doesn't have to be that
in the
night, that's
evening.
right.
It's not automatic, we have to vote on it right away, like we might be exhausted by then. Okay, so okay, thanks. So then I have no problem with having it at that date. I have no problem with your plan, Ms.
Okay.
Ms.
Thank you. Councillor Windsor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to add to that comment, I believe it would be wise to the follow-up meeting well after. Otherwise, it appears to lack sincerity to listen and have something that you want to take right into a discussion. So since we don't know what's going to come up and we're inviting the public to participate, I believe it would be reasonable to allow time and space to consider what they say. And if there's nothing, that's okay, but if there are some things, then that is add the benefit of full consideration.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Ms. Gagnon?
Hi. Thank you again. On follow-up to Councillor Windsor, that makes me think about the prior to the meeting. That's a month away. So how soon will we be able to get the information to the public, advertise, publicize? Because we had mentioned at the last meeting, we want to make sure the public has enough time before. It's a hefty document. I myself will be gone for 2 weeks camping. So just wondering, what is the plan for how much time prior to the meeting if we want to hear from the people? If we put the timeline just a month away from now, given vacation, are we better putting it later in September to give people more time? What's the staff's plan for that?
Oops, sorry. Ms. Mosier.
Through you, Madam Chair, to Ms. Gagnon. So the plan has been out in the public since, well, at least May. You received a copy of it since May. So in theory, it has been out in the public since even before that, because I do believe we did one last round of consultation with the public before bringing it to PAC, but otherwise we'll be putting it up. I mean, we have a dedicated website for this, but we will start putting the message out on social media and our typical channels as soon as we have a date.
Okay, so it could be as soon as today or tomorrow, give or take.
Yep.
Have time to
As soon
write
as
it.
we set the date, it'll go out.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Windsor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question, maybe a comment. I was looking for that the other day, and it's been on the web, on the home page, very visible, up till, I don't know, a few months ago, but now it's disappeared, and I had to go back in and seek and find under engagement. Given the magnitude of this process, I believe that should be remaining up in front where it was, so that people can see this is a significant project, and if we're really wanting people to stay tuned and informed, it should be made easy as we can make it. Thank you.
You're on.
Through you, to Councillor Windsor, we'll take that under advisement. Certainly, we want to make sure that everyone can easily access the information.
Mhm. I think it behooves us to take your words, seriously, and make sure that, if we're going to have a public participation meeting, that we engage with as many people as possible. So I'm sure they'll take that seriously. Councillor Windsor, thank you. Ms. Gagnon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to support Councillor Windsor in that. I too believe we need to advertise it widely and be proactive in getting people to know about this plan and their chance to give us their feedback on this.
Yep.
Thank you.
And I think that it needs to be said that as members of PAC, it's part of our job to put that out there as well. So if you have social media accounts, and you should be putting that out there as well. Okay, so I guess the first thing we need to do is everyone in agreement on September the 13th? Just hands? Okay. Now, the only other question is do we just want to go with the 6 o'clock and hopefully get to PAC afterwards? Do we want to have PAC in the late afternoon and then have the public participation meeting after? 3 and 6? 3 and 6, is that okay? Does that work for everybody? Councillor Windsor?
Madam Chair, I put up my hand, yes, to September 13th, but I'm really thinking a lot about it and thinking, okay, August is in that midst of summer. We've been in the dog days of summer. There's probably not a lot of enthusiasm right now to be engaged in things like this. I'm just wondering, and I realize the time imperative, which I really appreciate Mr. Conrad referring to earlier. But I just think, and then kids go back to school after Labor Day, which I think is September 4th or 5th. So, like that's when people get settled in, and be able to give time to something. I'm just wondering if we could delay it by a week or something like that, at least, to just allow more time for this to happen. And I would also then add and encourage that the documents that will be used can be forwarded to PAC so that we can share as we see fit. The documents where I know there may be slides and things like that that will not be, but the final report and stuff like that that we can share and encourage people to review and make comment on, that was made available to the members at the appropriate time, not too late, not too early, but so that we can, and particularly me, where I have a lot of constituents on a distribution list, I'd share and say, you know, please review. The meeting is coming up. You've got comments, come and share. So, two parts to it, but the first, I think we should maybe give a second thought to September 13th and maybe consider another week. I think another week, it could be argued that we've allowed some time, sufficient time, for people to get back into their fall routines. Thank you.
Mr. Vorak?
Again, it's up to PAC when they want to do this, but I'm just looking at council's agenda, and it will become quite complicated for
We have
the
committee
members
of
of
the whole that day.
council to start moving beyond that 13th.
Councillor Allen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to mention that Councillor Hurdle and myself will be out of the province on the 13th, attending a conference in PEI. So, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Gagnon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Then might we consider, I don't know the council's schedule and all that, but if we look then at the first Tuesday of October, the October 4th, that would be our other usual, or October 11th? When would be our next usual PAC meeting?
The next PAC meeting would be, looks like the 18th, but again, I remind PAC that we have a consultant that we have engaged, and he's committed to this day. I'm not entirely sure where that would leave us without our consultant if we push this out too much further.
Yeah.
Every delay also delays getting these implemented and adopted by council so we can start using these new and exciting tools for the village of Neminas.
So the September 20 and 27, given that this is the evening that we're looking at and stuff, would that still be a conflict with the schedules for counseling?
Yep.
Okay.
Councillor Granger?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say I'm good to go on the 13th from 3 till 6.
Thank you. Councillor Killam?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I too am wanting to see it come up on the 13th. But I think what we can do in the meantime is what's already been mentioned, that if we put the word out, the information's out there, it gives a month. And if people are really interested, they will look at that and participate. And if they're not, then so be it. So I'm looking the 13th myself, if possible.
Okay. So I guess the way I'm going to break this down is a show of hands for the people that are on board for the 13th. Okay? So that was the majority. Now, people who, a show of hands for having everything at 6 o'clock. Public participation in PAC after. Or show of hands for people that want to do 3 and 6. PAC at 3, public participation at 6. Okay. So we're September the 13th with PAC meeting at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That will be an advertised change. And the public participation meeting on the Neminas Secondary Plan will be at 6 p.m. in the evening. And staff and our committee will do everything in our power to make sure that all the information is available and that our public is well informed. Thank you very much. We're at public comments. Would anybody like to come forward and have anything to say? We only have one member of the public with us today, but he's got a big enough smile, I don't think he can talk around it. So, so that brings us to our next meeting, and that is September the 13th. And on that note, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Ms. Friars, Councillor Allen, thank you very much. All those in favor? I so appreciate you coming today. Thank you.